I'm Jeanette, Vice President of Marketing at Trade Hounds here at the NAED Marketing Summit. And I am very excited to be joined by the keynote speaker at the event, Carla Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
And you have a super interesting title. You're an innovation architect at Rethink Labs. What does that mean?
That's right. Well, I always say, if you cross Lady Gaga with Frank Lloyd Wright, what do you get? Because it's a perfect blend of creativity with structure. And I think a lot of times when we think of innovation, it's very data-driven, it's very left-brained, but there's so much creativity that comes into innovation. I think that's kind of the part that we forget. And, a lot of people assume there's somebody with a specific title or a specific background or some sort of special qualifications, and they're the only ones who get to be innovative. But I really believe innovation is everybody's business.
I love that. And it's especially important for distribution. It's something that is now becoming necessary. We have to innovate if distributors want to become more profitable in the future and want to make sure that we are keeping up with a lot of interesting changes that are happening right now, especially in the marketing world. So talk to me a little bit about some of the big takeaways that you want people to leave this conference or your speech today learning from you.
Well, I think the big thing is that, like in a lot of industries, it's easy to keep doing the thing you've always done because you've always done that thing. And there's a lot of people who I talk to who say, but that's just the way we do things around here. But if you look at the world and even the amount of change that we've gone through in the last 5 years, we've had a global pandemic. We have had a ship get askew in the Suez Canal that affected the global supply chain. We have a new generation of workers entering the workforce. We have a lot of transition in ownership and leadership. We have things like sustainability. We have AI. And there is so much that's changing that has nothing to do with the way that we've always done things, that if that's what we stick to, we are dramatically and drastically going to become irrelevant. And it doesn't matter how great our product is. It's a lot about how we think about the way we do business and how we adopt new mindsets. And I think especially if we look at how do we bring new talent into the workforce.
That's such a big passion of ours at Trade Hounds. We think about that every day. In our app, we have a lot of young people. So I think more than half of them are under the age of 35. And we work with a lot of distributors. So we're trying to explain, to meet the new buyers where they are means to meet them in a social environment. Social media apps are where they live. And it's something that's so important for people to realize that if you want to really reach that next generation of customers, you also have to innovate. Your strategies, your way of thinking about communication is changing a lot, and expectations are changing a lot.
Absolutely. And you talk about the main users under the age of 35. That's because that's a generation that grew up in a digital world. And so if you think as a leader, but this is the way I like to do things, and maybe they should adapt to my way, it would be no different than me saying, well, let me take your nice car and I'm going to give you a horse and wagon, because that's the way things used to be. And we had horses and wagons for a lot longer than we've ever had cars. And it sounds really ridiculous, right? Because we've moved on to a new way of thinking. And I think that's the greatest opportunity that most companies have, is how do we start to transition between the way we've always done things into the way that the new workforce wants to do them. And the companies who will start to listen to the workers who they want to recruit and have them be a part of the answer of how they make that transition, I think they're the ones that are going to jump ahead faster than anybody could imagine.
Yeah, and one of the cool things that I love about that is that it's actually easier now using some of the new technology to learn about those expectations and what your buyers want. I think, back in the day, I did a lot of focus groups, and it was great. And I think, I still do focus groups, but it was a lot harder to get a ton of information at once. And so what we do is we do lots of polling in the app, and within a day, we have 700 responses to a poll telling us exactly what tradespeople or contractors want from their distributors. And so I think leaning into some more of those innovative things can actually make your job much more efficient, not just more effective, but I think that's something that there's a lot of fun there in that innovative way and in all the cool new tools and technologies. But I think for some reason, a lot of people are afraid of innovation or they push back. So could you speak a little bit about how to overcome that fear of embracing new things?
Absolutely. And I think one of the bad reps that innovation has is that it's something that's expensive, it's time consuming, and it's incredibly disruptive to the business. And I believe that the best kind of innovation is just consistent small steps that everybody in an organization takes every single day. Like, I'll give you a couple of examples of how this can show up. There was a company who I interviewed for my book, Rethink Innovation. And they're a technology company. So, I mean, they're a little further along on the road of their willingness to try some things. But they shut down their company for a week every 6 months. And they said, this is our week to really focus on our product and serving our customers and coming together and figuring out what's next. And so during this week, they had innovation challenges where they took something that they had heard from a customer and they said, we want to solve this problem. Everybody in the organization was required to participate. Now, that doesn't mean everybody in the organization had to be the one to come up with the idea. They just had to contribute in a way that they felt comfortable. So if somebody said, I'm more comfortable putting together the PowerPoint, you can be a part of innovation, right? They don't have to figure out software. They don't have to write things, like they don't have to go out and figure out the customer problem or track all the data. They can simply help tell the story through a PowerPoint. So everybody contributed in a way that was comfortable and natural for them. So at the end of the week, they had innovation pitches and other people from the community business leaders came in and it was a little bit like a Shark Tank, right? So first of all, it was really fun. It was low risk because if the idea was something that seemed right, great. But really it was about practicing the process of how do we share and develop an idea. But one of the people worked in finance who was a part of this. And I don't remember what she chose to do during the week. But afterwards, she kind of got started thinking and she said, there's some things that I started to consider because I was a part of this innovation week that I think I can start to put into play now. And one of them is she looked around and she said, there's got to be things that I'm doing that's inefficient, right? I mean, I know I have a lot of things that I do that are inefficient. And she found this one report that was taking 40 manual hours every month. So 25% of her time every month was devoted to coming up with this report. And she said, well, I like watching the programmers, I think I could figure some of this out. So she taught herself a programming language, wrote a simple little program to automate that report. It now takes 12 minutes. So she has gained back 39 hours and 48 minutes a month. Was it disruptive? Absolutely not. Like the business didn't stop. They're not selling something different. But she thought innovatively and she's like, I guess this is my responsibility too. So essentially she's now getting 15 months worth of work done in 12. And that to me is highly innovative. So I think we need to change what we think innovation looks like in an organization and then start to understand, okay, there's a lot of other places that we can learn from. Maybe it won't be done exactly the same way, but the idea that McDonald's had for how to make their drive-thru more efficient came from a Formula One pit stop. Now, a Formula One pit stop and a fast food restaurant are dramatically different, but they can learn from their mistakes. And so it makes bringing that idea, that concept into McDonald's a lot less risk because they can see ahead of what's been done by somebody else before. And I think there's a lot that can be done in the distributor industry as well by learning what has worked and also what hasn't in other industries.
I love that you mentioned that too, because the increased productivity is what I feel like is the biggest thing that people have to gain from being more innovative. If you just take that time and kind of get over the fear or whatever, the hesitation to just try something new. And I'm like, props to this person for learning how to do something new. And I will say too, like the cool thing that I feel is happening more and more now, especially because of AI, there are so many other softwares or maybe existing softwares, like maybe your CRM that you've been using has now released like a new AI tool that you could use to become so much more productive. And I think that's the really cool thing I'm seeing. Like we're transitioning over to HubSpot at our company. And there are so many cool AI things that I just learned about that I can feel myself like getting so much more time to like really focus on the quality of my work, to be much more efficient with my time. And the thing is, like, when you look at all these cool new AI tools, you're like, well, you have to learn it. So you do have to invest the time to learn it, but then you get so much more time back in return if you just have more of that innovative thinking, or if you're just like not afraid to put that in place. And so I think having that culture of innovation is so important. So I love that example. And in your book, I know you write about other examples that people can maybe learn from. So can you share a couple other takeaways or some of the favorite parts of your book that you want people to really learn from?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one that would be really relevant for your listeners is one from Emerson, the industrial manufacturing company in St. Louis. So Emerson had gone through a dramatic shift. And theirs, like a lot of companies, was slow and methodical, but they consistently kept turning that steering wheel to shift them in a more creative and innovative direction. And so one of the things they struggled with was hiring new talent. Because if you're a 125-year-old organization in St. Louis, Missouri, that works on industrial products, it's hard to compete with a Google, an Apple, and a Netflix if you're right out of college and you want to apply your engineering chops. So they said one of the things that we have to look at is we have to look at how do we show up in the world and how do we present ourselves? Because if people are comparing who I want to work for, a lot of young people want to work for cooler companies. So they looked at everything that made them a brand and how they showed up, including down to what music on hold are we playing? Is it something that's geared toward people who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s? The oldies from the 80s or 70s? Or is it something that if somebody is calling in and wants to apply or is responding to schedule an interview, is it music that they would like? I mean, it's such a smart little detail, but it's really innovative in looking at who is our customer and how do we truly become what they want us to be so that they want to come work for us. So little things like, what's your music on hold look like? But another thing is they partnered with Hank Green, who's a YouTube star who teaches young kids, students about how to learn science and math. And then his brother does history and English. And so by partnering with somebody who's already part of their sphere, they've created a brand affinity and shown that, they really do get what my problems are. And if I'm an engineering major and I grew up watching Hank Green videos to get through some of my math and physics and science classes, now Emerson comes in and I see that they're in that same kind of light. It creates a relationship by association. And I think that's very innovative in thinking like that. Another one that I love that they did is when they rolled out their values across an organization. You think when we have a lot of change internally or something that we want to announce, our typical approach is let's do a talking head video of an executive, right? They're the subject matter expert, they're the leadership, they're the face of the organization. But Emerson thought differently. And they had actually, their chief marketing officer, Kathy Buttonbell, had seen a video of dads who play with Barbies. And it's very just heartwarming and shows a connection that we don't normally think of little girls playing Barbies with their dad. And so she looked at that and said, now why was that so successful? One, it was unexpected. Two, is just so sincere because it's the sweetness of these young girls explaining something to, a serious older male person in their life. And so she said, well, we can take inspiration from that. And so when they launched their new corporate video or values, instead of having the executive talking head, they invited the children of employees of Emerson to come explain those values. And I think that is an example of how we can start to try something new and really have it be low risk. So what she did is she understood it was the sweetness of the juxtaposition of these little girls explaining something to their dad, gruff dads. And the same thing could work in a very highly engineering-driven organization, is to have something unexpected but important and familiar, children explaining these values. And so when we start to look at what's the process, we can see, well, one, we have to be a little bit more observant of the world around us outside of our natural day-to-day thing. And when we do that, like, what are the patterns that we start to see? We can see that with, what do younger employees care about? What do people applying for a job care about? Music on hold. And then we can start to say, well, how does that relate to what we're trying to do? And then that will start to generate some new ideas. And then when you share an idea, like, a pitch is really just the story of the journey of your idea. And so if you start out by saying, here's something I noticed, here's something I observed, and what I saw is, like, general pattern is this, and I think that relates to our company and our situation because of XYZ. Right there, because you've given people context for where the idea came from, their emotional feelings of risk drop dramatically.
I love that creativity. I love it so much. And I also think it's such a great example for distributors or manufacturers that maybe want to be more creative, or they want to have content that maybe resonates more with, like, the newer generation. And also, to your point with, like, the influencers, that's kind of a safer way to maybe take that creativity leap and maybe feel like it's a little safer. So you could partner with innovators in your industry, different types of people who have followings, maybe bigger Instagram following,
exactly.
or people who have the viewers that are like your target demographic. And I think that's something I'm seeing starting to happen more in distribution. We're starting to get questions from our distributor partners about influencer marketing. And it's a really awesome tool that I think the distributors could use a lot more of, especially in this space, because we have a lot of subject matter experts. Like, we have licensed electricians that can actually speak to how to install that product in a way that resonates more with, like, your younger buyers. And then you don't have to shoot it. You don't have to do it. They already have a following. And I love that approach. And I see that happening more and more. And it seems like such an effective way to be innovative, but also to not feel like you have to take on such a big task. You don't have to do it all yourself. You can lean on other people for creativity, or for maybe to showcase your brand in a way that maybe you might not even think about. So I love that as a way to, like, partner with others to be more innovative about your marketing strategy. I think that's really smart.
Well, I think a really nice thing about working with influencers is, like you said, they have the audience, but I think they can bring some perceptions to how your story is told that you might not always think of. And if we think about younger generations, one of the things that matters to them is, like, why are you doing this? Some purpose-driven messaging. And I think also building that sense of community, that it's not only about the money at the end of the day, but what are we trying to help people accomplish? Like, we're here at the NAED conference, and it's all about, electrifying America. And so how do we start to tell that story in a way that still feels real to us, but maybe in a little more creative way that an influencer can help us do, in a way that also shows what's the impact that we're having with the work that we do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing such amazing tips. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience that we didn't talk about yet?
I think one of the things I always encourage people to do are do little experiments. Do little non-risky experiments. Maybe put a couple of $100 behind an experiment and just see what happens. We were talking about social media. I test a lot of things on social media. And I remember one of the questions that I asked gave me so much information that I never imagined. I just put a little poll on LinkedIn and I said, is management a block for your best ideas? And the response was incredible. I mean, people voted yes or no, but what they shared in their comments gave me so much information about how employees have ideas, but management will say, that's not the way we do things that's not the way we do things around here. We're not that kind of company. We don't have that kind of budget. It's just like a hard door slam no, instead of creating an environment where ideas are welcome and talked through. So I think there's a lot of easy ways, inexpensive ways to test ideas and see where they go before you ever invest a lot of money.
And I really like that you bring that up, because I think some managers will just flat out say no. And so some employees have a reason for maybe being hesitant to share things. But sometimes you just assume that your manager is going to say no, or you assume that because the brand has always been this way, they're not going to take your idea. And so I would definitely encourage people who are maybe younger, who might not be in a position of management, to share those ideas anyways, because maybe they say yes.
Exactly.
Or maybe the managers decide, like, I'm going to shift my perspective. I'm going to be more welcome. And I think maybe managers too, like what you said, even if it's a shutdown or just sending an email to everybody and saying, share your ideas with me, or having a one-on-one and say, like, is there anything you think we could be doing differently? Especially tapping into the people who are more in touch with the younger people especially. I've gotten so many amazing ideas from the marketing team because they're on TikTok every day.
Exactly.
They live this. And so if that's the audience that you're trying to reach, and you know that your buyers and your new buyers are coming in and they're going to be younger and younger, I think that's such a great piece of advice. It doesn't take a lot of extra time. It doesn't take a lot of extra money, but it's like ensuring that everyone in your company feels like they can be part of the innovative process and they are encouraged to share ideas. I think is such a wonderful tip to end on. I can't thank you enough, and I'm excited to be at the NAED Marketing Summit, and looking forward to a really exciting week ahead. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was a delight to be here.